Number 8. HMS Victory. Throughout naval history, there have been at least 6 ships named the HMS Victory. The 6th Victory, ordered in 1758, was arguably the most formidable of them all. She served under dozens of captains and admirals throughout her decades-long career as a Royal Navy warship. Built from over 2,000 oak trees, the 227-foot-long ship came at a cost of £63,176, the equivalent of more than £50 million in modern currency. With more than 104 guns, the Victory was armed to the hilt. It was also much faster than most ships of the time owing to its superior hull design and 4 acres of sails. The vessel first saw combat in 1778 during an encounter between the British and the French in the English Channel, known as the First Battle of Ushant. Although the battle occurred far from the United States, it was a product of the American Revolution. 2 years later, the Victory helped intercept a French naval fleet off the coast of Brittany during another engagement of the American Revolution, known as the Second Battle of Ushant. In 1782, the vessel guided a merchant convoy past a French and Spanish military blockade and into Gibraltar. And in 1797, it fought against the Spanish and won in the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. The Victory's most famous win came during the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, when Lord Horatio Nelson led his outnumbered fleet of 27 ships into combat against a Franco-Spanish fleet of 33 ships near Gibraltar. Nelson's men attacked fiercely and relentlessly, securing an unlikely victory. And while Nelson was fatally shot during the melee, he went down in history as one of the greatest naval commanders of all time. After sustaining heavy damage at Trafalgar, the Victory spent the next several decades serving as a troop ship, a floating depot, a prison ship, and a school. Public campaigns saved the ship from being dismantled and ultimately led to her restoration as a museum. After more than 244 years of service, she's the world's oldest naval vessel still in commission. Number 7. HMS Vanguard. During the late 1930s, the British Royal Navy became worried that its battleship fleet would become outnumbered by German and the Japanese vessels. In a bid to keep up with the competition, they designed the Lion class of 6 fast battleships. According to the plans, the ships would be more heavily armored than the famously solid American Iowa-class battleships, and each Lion-class ship would be armed with 9 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets. But gun turrets are both expensive and complicated to build, and the British overshot their ambitions and ran into construction delays due to the time required to construct the large-caliber guns. As a result, only 1 Lion-class ship was ever built. Commissioned in 1946, the 814-foot-long HMS Vanguard was the last battleship built for the Royal Navy. She was also the largest and fastest British battleship ever constructed, and was only exceeded in size and might internationally by the Japanese Yamato and American Iowa-class ships. The Vanguard never saw combat in the Pacific as its designers originally intended, but it was probably for the best. While it was an impressively sturdy and seaworthy ship, it was more lightly armed than initially planned due to some improvisations that were made during its construction for the sake of getting it built. For most of its short-lived career, the Vanguard was used for training exercises. She was put into reserve in 1956 after just 10 years of service, and was scrapped a few years later after authorities deemed the maintenance and operating costs to be too high. Number 6. CSS Virginia. Built in Boston, Massachusetts during the 1850s, the USS Merrimack was a 275-foot-long steam frigate that ended up serving on both sides of the American Civil War. When Virginia joined the Confederacy in April of 1861, the ship was tasked with destroying the Union shipyard at Norfolk, but it was blocked by boats that were deliberately scuttled by Confederate forces, giving its crew no choice but to abandon ship. To prevent the Merrimack from falling into enemy hands, they lit it on fire, burned it to the waterline, and sank what was left of it. This didn't stop the Confederates from salvaging the ship's hull, mainly because they were desperate for ships. They rebuilt the Merrimack into the ironclad CSS Virginia in hopes of destroying the Union's wooden ship blockade at the historic Battle of Hampton Roads. And while the newly built ship was certainly formidable, they were in for a surprise. By then, the Union had gotten word that the Confederacy had an ironclad ship, and President Abraham Lincoln had ordered the Union to come up with its own version of the vessel. The Union showed up to the battle prepared, and while its outcome was inconclusive, American forces ultimately took control of Hampton Roads. Number 5. USS Monitor. President Abraham Lincoln ordered the construction of an ironclad warship in 1861 after learning that the Confederacy had ramped up its shipbuilding efforts with the construction of the ironclad CSS Virginia. Dubbed the USS Monitor, the Union built the ship from start to finish in just 3 months, and in 1862, the 179-foot-long vessel set sail from Brooklyn for the first time. Just 2 months later, during the Battle of Hampton Roads in Virginia, it exchanged gunfire with the CSS Virginia, the ironclad Confederate ship that was built with the intention of superseding. After celebrating Christmas on the Monitor later that year, the crew set out for Beaufort, North Carolina, where they planned to join up with 2 other Union vessels and proceed to Charleston as part of a blockade. At that point, the Monitor wasn't seaworthy, and its crew knew it, but they did as they were told. Consequently, the ship's career was short-lived. While being towed out to sea, the vessel encountered a brutal storm. It began rolling uncontrollably and took on water so rapidly that the crew was unable to pump it out faster than it was coming in. They were powerless to stop the Monitor from sinking and had no choice but to abandon ship 16 miles off Cape Hatteras. 47 sailors were rescued by the ship's tugboat, and 16 died at sea. The wreck was rediscovered 111 years later in 1973. To protect it from looters, the site became part of the country's first designated marine sanctuary in 1975. Efforts to raise the Monitor began in 1995 and led to the recovery of its anchor turret, as well as the remains of 2 sailors and a gold wedding band. The sailors were given a proper burial, and the salvaged parts were conserved and displayed at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, along with a replica of the ship. Number 4. The Tirpitz. The 832-foot-long Tirpitz was one of 2 Bismarck-class Nazi battleships that served the Kriegsmarine during World War II. It was the heaviest European-made naval battleship of all time, outweighing its sister ship, the Bismarck, by 2,000 tons. All too aware of the vessel's power, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill made it an urgent priority to destroy the Tirpitz. He saw the massive battleship as a threat to Allied shipping and was particularly worried about the Germans targeting Arctic convoys that were en route to the Soviet Union with desperately needed supplies. In an effort to discourage an attack, the Royal Navy spent considerable resources maintaining a naval presence that was capable of putting up a realistic fight against the Tirpitz. For the time being, the Nazis ultimately concluded that it was too risky to undertake any operations in Allied shipping lanes with the ship. Much of the vessel's short-lived career was spent stationed in German-occupied waters off Norway, where its role was to deter a potential Allied invasion. In 1942, the Tirpitz participated in 2 attempts to intercept Allied Arctic convoys. Throughout the following year, it fought against the Allies in Norway. By late 1943, sustained Allied air raids began taking a toll on the ship, but it remained in the region for another year. The final blow to the Tirpitz came in late 1944, when British bombers pelted it with 3 12,000-pound bombs in an air raid codenamed Operation Catechism. As the ship began to sink extremely fast, a deck fire spread to an ammunition magazine, causing a large explosion. Just minutes after being hit, the Tirpitz slipped beneath the waves. German casualties were estimated at somewhere between 950 and 1,200 sailors, while the British suffered 0 losses. In the years following the war, the destroyed ship was broken up and scrapped. Number 3. USS New Jersey. Built during the 1940s, the American Iowa-class battleships were designed to intercept the fastest enemy warships and to act as the fast wing alongside slower naval vessels. It was the first time that the U.S. Navy prioritized speed in a battleship design. Each Iowa-class vessel measured 880 feet long and, according to rumors, was capable of traveling of up to 40 miles an hour over short distances. But until 1968, its top recorded speed was clocked at 37.5 miles per hour by its arguably most fearsome ship, the USS New Jersey. That same year, the New Jersey came out of retirement to serve in the Vietnam War. During its shakedown cruise, Captain Floyd Gooch pushed the engines to their limits, reaching a top speed of 40 miles per hour and maintaining it for 6 hours straight. After that, Captain Gooch ordered its crew to brake at full force. The New Jersey continued moving ahead for another 2 miles before coming to a complete stop. A post-shakedown inspection of the ship found the engine in perfect working order, even after being brutally strained. The New Jersey was slated for inactivation in 1969, and its fellow Iowa-class battleships last saw combat during the Gulf War in 1991. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. scaled back on its fleet of warships, and by then, the Iowa-class vessels had become more or less obsolete anyway. But they had also come to represent a source of national pride, so they were spared from being scrapped and donated to various museums around the country where they remain to this day. Number 2. Littorio class. Built between 1934 and 1942, the Littorio class of battleships consisted of 3 vessels that served under the Reggio Marina, the Italian Navy, during World War II. The 2 main ships of the fleet were the Littorio and Vittorio Veneto, measuring 780 feet long and nearly 108 feet wide. The Littorio-class ships were designed in response to the French Dunkirk-class fast battleships. Armed with a main battery of 9 15-inch guns in 3 triple turrets and with a top speed of 35 miles per hour, the Littorio, Vittorio Veneto, and their sister ship, the Roma, were both fast and well-armed. Their careers were ironically rather unsuccessful, but their failures had more to do with poor reconnaissance training among their crews than the ships themselves. The Littorio and Vittorio Veneto conducted several sorties in the Mediterranean, but saw little success with intercepting British convoys. They were both torpedoed repeatedly throughout their years of service and became mostly inactive from 1942 onward. All 3 Littorio-class ships were damaged in the Allied attacks the following year, and in September of 1943, Italy capitulated and handed the ships over to the Allies. The Roma was sunk that same month, and the Littorio and Vittorio Veneto were scrapped during the early 1950s, bringing their short-lived careers to an unceremonious end. Number 1. The Yamato. Built for the Imperial Japanese Navy shortly before World War II, the 840-foot-long Yamato was the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleship ever constructed. Knowing their battleship supply was vastly outnumbered by Allied vessels, Japanese naval officials vowed to make up for what they lacked in quantity with sheer size. Construction on the Yamato began in 1937. Despite its size, the Imperial Japanese Navy managed to keep the vessel a secret from other countries. Completed 3 months ahead of schedule, it was at least 30% bigger than any of its enemy ships, and its 69-foot guns were the largest guns ever fitted to a naval ship. Weighing more than 162 tons each, they were capable of firing explosive and armor-piercing shells at a distance of up to 26 miles. The Yamato was also armed with 150 machine guns that were capable of firing 220 rounds per minute. While the Yamato was superior when it came to size and firepower, it fell short in some ways. It was slow, it burned a lot of fuel, experienced a chronic ammunition shortage on board, and spent a lot of time not being used due to its inefficiency. In April of 1945, the ship's crew set sail for Okinawa with plans to fight the Americans to the death in a mission codenamed Operation 10 Go. But the Yamato was sailing without any air cover, and the Americans wasted no time pelting it with bombs. Just minutes after the crew was ordered to abandon ship, the Yamato began to capsize. It quickly rolled over in the water and blew up, claiming all but 280 members of its 2,778-man crew and resulting in a mushroom cloud that was visible from as far as 99 miles away. Thanks for watching. Which one of these battleships shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.